Hey guys, let us know if you can hear us.
We have a heart symbol.
Nobody's listening over there.
Yes.
Okay, sound and video is great.
Oh, okay.
Great. All right. Welcome to our Friday weekly update and Q&A. I'm Tim. This is Ben. We're City State Entertainment. We're making Camelot Unchained.
For the one person.
Yeah, for the one
like,
guy there who
this?
doesn't know who we are, just in case, you know.
It's possible.
It's been a good week. Lots of stuff going on. We'll get to it here in a bit, but we've got a bunch of different tests we've been doing this week, following tests we did last week. Bots and abilities and characters. And speaking of tests, we have, if you're in IT or Alpha, we've got stuff going on New Auto Prep right now. Assuming that doesn't burst into flames, we'll probably do something this weekend. Time TBD, but it'll probably be IT and Alpha. So
is that on abilities?
Characters.
Okay.
Characters. Abilities, hopefully next week. But we let the IT guys in on that earlier this week, like we promised we would. So that's exciting, and yeah, we'll jump right into it. Yeah, number one, UI, the new crafting UI. So AJ's finished work on the new crafting UI, and it's been pushed to Hatchery and also New Auto Prep. It's live on the IT Alpha test right now. So if you guys want to check out the new crafting UI, it's been a labor of love, and it's nice to finally see it landed. For a while there, it was like, okay, where are we at this? Well, it's in review to JB, and then it was in review to Q, and then it was in review to Ben, and then we did revisions, and then it did the lap. So it's been going around and around, and it's nice to land it and get it out in front of you guys. It's really sexy. So yeah, if you guys are interested in the crafting stuff, the new crafting UI is on New Auto Prep. So before, during, or after the Q&A, hop on and check it out if you're an IT and Alpha. Do you want to do the improved ability stuff? Or?
Yeah, I think I know what most of these things are. Sometimes we get these that are broken down into multiple parts. So this is 4 parts of the work in progress of the ability system. Part A, Caleb has been busy adding armor penetration, resist, and arrow stats to the improved ability system, which is all stuff that we've had working before. It just has to get re-hooked up according to some of the changes that we've been making. Let's see. Anthony implemented a few lingering ability components and traits, fixed up some bugs as they were discovered. We are neck deep in testing the abilities for functionality and hope to have them pushed to a backer test shortly. So that's the thing we said, maybe next week.
Yeah. So that's you know, we've been working on all the new classes, and we rejiggered a little bit of the low level stuff around some of the way the abilities were implemented. So as some of those features are coming back online, we're getting all the relevant ability components / parts. And so just every time we get a new feature or a new tool, guys like Anthony go out and make all the abilities that have been unblocked, or make the ability parts that have been unblocked because of that.
Yeah. And so part C of this, Christina worked on getting progression hooked up with the improved abilities. This will allow abilities to scale based on your usage. And then part D, Christina also spent some time getting deflection working on the new ability system, which is going to require some other upgrades within the system before it is completely implemented, but the base functionality is complete. So I don't know the details of exactly what that means, but getting deflection hooked back up is also really important. So that's just another part of the system that's, like Tim was saying, we're just getting things plugged back in and making sure everything works.
But you know, for the guys who hopped on earlier this week, you know, all of the new classes are not quite finished, and we're still working on some of the rejiggering that's going on for some of the existing abilities. But we had mages, healers, fighters, and archers all on that test.
Yep.
So those are coming along swimmingly. Number 3, tech patcher work. So AJ updated the patcher style framework to boost the performance of the patcher by quite a bit. The change has been pushed to the experimental patcher for evaluation. So those of you who are in IT who know how to get to the experimental patcher, you're welcome to use that. It's just perf gains. And once we've got some more mileage on that, we'll push it live so everybody else can get to it. I'll get this one, and then you can have the design one.
All right.
So Ability Builder UI. James submitted the UI for the new Ability Builder for review. We'll be tweaking the Ability Builder next week, and we should have it ready for testing soon. So the testing we did earlier this week was using a temporary, what we call Dev UI, to craft abilities. James has the actual UI design for that, and once that's all through the review process, then we'll start getting it hooked up, and you guys will have a real UI for that.
Yep. Let's see. So number 5 is work in progress design armor definitions. So it says that I am working on item definitions so that they conform to a smaller number of slots, and this will allow them to apply stats more effectively now that we aren't using separate health bars for different body parts. This will also inform changes to the crafting system later. So what all that means basically is that we're changing our armor slots to conform to no longer using body part health bars, and that means combining them differently. Essentially, that will push the breakdown of armor slots further into the crafting system, so you don't have to have as many items specifically equipped to slots on your character anymore, but you will still have to customize those items by putting them together in the crafting system. So something that might have been 2 or 3 different slots on your character before will now just be 1 slot that you'll actually equip that item. But then in crafting, you'll have to build that item out of 3 different pieces. So that's what that is.
So you're going to craft like boots and leggings and waist, and then combine them into one item that you equip?
Maybe not those 3, but something like that. Yeah, like arms do that a bit. So you have, like, instead of having a separate shoulder, yeah. So you can do a little bit of that, and then we still have the same kind of thing where like a robe might be legs and torso or whatever, where it crosses over multiple slots. So yeah.
Building physics. So Colin's been working on simplifying the building physics meshes. This helps ensure that our servers can handle lots of buildings. So there's a couple of different bits to that are sort of important. We already do what we call mesh simplification on like a lot of the characters and some of the renderable bits, so that there's not as many polys for us to render. We've moved that into the physics server so that there's less polys doing collision, which makes the collision stuff faster, and there's fewer polys loaded into memory so that we have more room for memory overhead. So all in all, that's just a general like perf improvement for anywhere that building geo touches. Let's see here. I'll just hit a couple of these real quick. I like rolling this together. Tech death. So death on the tech side. Rob has changed some of the technical details of how we handle death, but it pretty much works the same on the surface. We now have the capability of easily adding more ways for everyone to kill each other, though, and generally the error tracking around it was approved, so that we're absolutely sure you're dead. So there was a couple of subtle places where there was nuanced differences between like what being alive meant and what being dead meant, and sometimes the client and the server weren't quite in agreement there. And so we've tried to sort of solidify that, streamline it, simplify it in places where it's relevant, so that the client and the server can be in agreement, and so that there aren't like edge cases where you could sort of become a zombie.
Yeah, and that was because we sort of changed the framework of how death worked in general, because previously there was a direct connection between running out of health and dying, and now it's an event-based system.
Correct.
So we can say, when you would have died, don't. Or when you would have died, also explode, or something else happens when you die, as opposed to you just run out of health and you immediately die with no event handling possible.
It was also sort of just like a flat state before, where like you would go from being alive to dead without really notifying anybody, and so we couldn't do cool things with abilities like anytime a nearby ally dies, you get stronger, or your opponents, get perks anytime an enemy dies or anything like that. So now that has been said, now that it's hooked up to an event system, we can have cool abilities that interact with death of friends or foes or anybody. Also, part of that was right now death happens like if your health hits 0 or if blood hits 0. Because death is a little bit more of a, you can just sort of set someone to dead or configure the criteria for death. We can expose more of that to Ben, and so you could say you're dead if it's if your health is 0, or if your blood is 0, or if it's daytime and you're a vampire or something wacky like that. Like a lot more of that is exposed to Ben and designed for doing cool things. And then created entities, Rob added support for having modifiers change the physics of created entities, such as making projectiles faster or clouds bigger, so that we can either make ability parts or buffs and debuffs that affect the objects you create in the world in new and interesting ways. So sort of the same theme of before, of just giving Ben more options in terms of the abilities he can do and the way things interact. Go.
Oh, okay. So number 9 is work in progress art for Magic Mortars. So the models for the Magic Mortars are complete, this says, and Mike's now finishing his first pass on the visual effects for them. So these will be temporary for testing until we get a second pass, which will be spend a lot more time on making them actually pretty and more of a shippable rather than a placeholder thing. So these will be hopefully ready to try out in the not too distant future. We'll see how that goes. But they're tied up in the new abilities too, so they'll be available when we start getting into siege testing with the updated abilities.
Animation system improvements. We currently have several little pops and hitches in our movement animations, specifically when you're starting or stopping motion, as well as abruptly changing direction. So we fixed several of those issues, and we should have it in next week with more improvements to come.
Yeah, that is really good.
Yeah,
Tyler
yeah.
showed that to me just a little while ago.
There was like, it's been a few months back, like Ben was like, look, it does this thing when I start moving and stop moving, and it bothers me, and we didn't have anybody available to hop on animations at the time, so we've been getting a lot of animation work done recently now that we have folks that are spun up on that.
Yep. You want me to do this one? Let's see. So work in progress art, characters 2.0, better looking and more performant characters. So part A, status. Most of this week was spent cleaning up small, lower priority issues so we can get this into the hands of testers this weekend. While minor bug fixing will continue next week, we'll begin moving on other priorities for the relevant artists.
Yeah, I'll jump in on this one.
Yeah.
So this one, number 11, is sort of undersold again a little bit in here. Characters 2.0 is a thing we've been working on for a couple of months now. There's a fair bit of tech in the way that we compose characters and the way that we take meshes and process them and glue them together, the ways that we render them. In addition to a lot of work from the art team in the way that they author the characters, and this is mostly pertains to like character art, like the skin and the armor and how all that gets put together. So there's lots and lots of work that's been happening by our characters team and by the art team to facilitate this. The end goal of which is supporting a bunch of new animation opportunities, some new, perf and better looking characters. So there's lots and lots of work that's been going on there. That's the testing that we're doing this weekend. We're excited to finally be able to land that and start showing it off. Again, this weekend we'll be doing IT and alphas. Assuming none of that bursts into flames, we'll probably put it on to let you beta guys see it either next week or probably next week or later in the week probably. So that's sort of Characters 2.0 in a nutshell. That was the first item on that. Second item is LODs. So we did some debugging of the support code this week for our first test assets. We've imported about half of the new assets, and over the next week we'll be continuing to add the needed LOD models for all the races, genders, and classes and tune them according to our performance testing. So some of the other work that happened there, it used to be that we would procedurally sort of decompose the meshes at the various LODs, which A, took a little bit of time every time a character was generated, and B, would never look as good or be as optimal as an artist could make it. So because of this new LOD work, the artists are, we're still leaving the procedural system in place, but the artists now have the ability to go in and say, you know, when this guy is 100 meters away or 30 meters away or however far away he is at the different LODs, this is how I want him to look. And so they can optimize both the perf and the visibility, as opposed to having a computer do it procedurally and not really have an eye for it, just shooting for target polys and all of that. So it's one of the rare cases where we get to add both perf and visual fidelity with the same change.
And that is going into testing here pretty soon?
Well, that's so not all of the LODs are done. We've started on that, and there's more work to do there. But some of I'm not sure exactly where the LOD stuff is. We've got the characters 2.0s. That's what we're testing now in this weekend. I'm not sure exactly where the LOD stuff is. It might be in. If not, it's in review. But it's very, very close.
Cool. And then there is a work in progress also for art for mage outfits. So John began work on reskinning the Arthurian mage. It's actually just a reskinning of the light armor for the Arthurian mage. And these outfits will be included in the default gear for all the mages to differentiate them from healers when we get them in. So everybody will have a different starting look, so as you run around in the game, you'll be able to kind of tell who is who as far as what classes are.
Yeah, like building out a whole new armor set is a fair amount of work for the art team, but if we can take an existing armor set and basically add a new texture to it, do a paint over, it's not anywhere near as much work, and we still get cool looking distinct armor for sort of stylistically for each of the classes. Though we talked about it, you know, moving forward we may not do like light, medium, and heavy armor for each class. That's just not realistic, but you know, something to differentiate like different roles that share armor types and stuff like that. So that's our top 12.
Yeah.
So if you guys have questions for us, I'm engineer, Ben is designer, throw them at us.
All right, give us your questions. We've got design questions covered and programming, just as, or engineering, as Tim pointed out.
It's gonna build.
Odovic says it's a sweet list of improvements in the top 10-ish.
Good.
Let's see here. Omar on the YouTube chat wanted to know, where's Mark?
Yeah, Mark's not in today, so
Not feeling well.
yeah.
Well, Lodoween asks, for Tim, what kind of exploits have you come up with to thwart Ben's ideas?
I would never exploit a system, and Ben's designs are so good they're difficult to exploit. What's fun stuff that we found recently? I don't know. Like, this week has been, since we've been playing around with the ability crafting, I've more been focused on less exploit and just, well, like, you know, what's the most fun abilities, what's the most OP abilities. Nothing really crazy has stood out, which for a first pass is phenomenal.
Okay.
Yeah, this week's been less about exploiting and more about just playing around with all the options. I was mostly playing the Wave Weaver during the ability test, so making lots of people moist.
Sacrix asks, will you be able to differentiate between one Mjolnir to another on spec line, and will it be tied to weapon via stats?
So you'll be able to differentiate them based on their choices in their traits and the choices in their ability component choices and proficiencies. So they don't have as wide of a variety as, you know, we've talked about, because you've been here for a while, we've talked about having like a path system and making sure that each class had a very broad amount of choices, but having a much fewer number of classes. We've since changed to having a much smaller number of classes, but or a much smaller number of spec lines, but a much larger number of classes. So there are a lot of classes in the game, but each one doesn't have as much vast diversity in completely different lines that they can take. But the Mjolnir is one that does have a good amount of variety there. So for the differences between primarily going with lightning damage or primarily going with melee damage, or going into more defense versus offense. So you'll be able to tell based on how much damage you're dealing to them, or what abilities they're tending to use against you, which thing they're most focused on. It might be a little bit hard to directly communicate that because there's not like a hard spec line choice that you make somewhere where you pick your spec from a list of them. It's more dynamic than that because it's the build that you put together from all these different pieces. So people are going to come up with hopefully some very different ideas of how they put together their specific combination of what race and what class and what traits and what abilities to make their specific build. So it might be a little bit hard. That'll get a bit templatized over time, I'm sure. As you're familiar with these games, people kind of come up with standard builds and other people follow them, and so there will be some of that, I'm sure, that goes on. But hopefully there'll be enough diversity that people can choose enough variety of things that won't be too strong, and it'll be a little bit less clear exactly what somebody is building around and what capabilities they have, because they can make different choices from everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the testing we've done thus far, I think the Mjolnir is probably one of the more underplayed melee classes, but it's also like the one that I've seen the most successful variety on. Like there have absolutely been like tank Mjolnirs and melee Mjolnirs, and I didn't see a whole lot of guys using the lightning damage, but like I think a couple of weeks ago Bumble started running like a lightning build, and Bumble just slaughters people left and right. So that's picked up popularity a little bit and has been fairly successful, I think. So it's been really cool watching just the different play styles for specifically for the Mjolnir this early in development.
Yeah, and he got away with a little bit more of that because we didn't have any weapon diversity before, and so you wouldn't have the difference between like a polearm Black Knight and a sword and shield Black Knight, but you definitely got the difference between hammers and lightning.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that was one of the first things I did, like, when we landed the new ability stuff, is started playing around with, what happens if I use a sword in the offhand versus a shield in the offhand, because the shield can use bashing or crushing or whatever it is, and where those break-evens are.
Yeah, and now that deflection is working, shield should be a lot better.
Yeah.
Real Life Gobbo asks, what are you guys excited for next?
Next? Like immediately next? I don't know. Probably getting the abilities and the characters merged together.
Yeah, we started talking about at the beginning of the year that we were doing some of this work both with characters and with the improved ability stuff. Unlocking it so that we can start doing the mix and match your weapons and the wider variety of weapons, and all of that is super, super exciting. One of the things that's sort of near and dear to me as someone who works on the server a lot is, I expect most of you have been into the bot battles. We opened them up, or the ARC battles. We opened those up to, I think, beta 2s. While we were demonstrating those, we were also gathering data so that we could see where our bottlenecks were and where our pain points were. And there was just this rapid succession of, oh, here's a bottleneck. I think this one's fairly easy to fix, and we fixed it, and we'd hit another bottleneck somewhere else, but we'd gain, a little bit of perf, and so we'd fix that one, gain a little bit of perf, and find the next one. And we have a pretty clear trajectory, I think, to like the next steps that we need to do to sort of unlock the next few bottlenecks, and I'm excited for us to get the opportunity to do that. Though the numbers of people we've put in a battle are so hilariously higher than everybody else, at some point we have to go like, is there value in going from 4,000 people to 5,000 people in a fight, right? Like, it's really, really cool, but is that the best thing we can be doing for Camelot right now? But I'm excited about that because server stuff and all of that excites me.
Cyvius asks, is there a crafting how-to out there yet? The UI looks awesome, by the way.
Sure.
So there's an older guide. If you just fire up the patcher, there's like the beta guide. And there's a crafting section in that, including a link to all the recipes. So the general theme of that in terms of how shaping works and how refining works and how making works is mostly the same. I got to play with the crafting UI a little bit earlier, and it's far more intuitive than the old one was. Like the old one, you needed to know the recipes and all of that. The new UI is much better about informing you sort of what you need to do and what pieces you need to work with to make the thing that you want to make, what your options are. And I'm sure we'll be doing some of that tuning. I think long term we want there to be a little bit more discovery in that process.
Yeah, you're supposed to be able to do have a little bit more uncertainty as far as what your results are going to be and what happens if you put in different infusions and stuff. You'll have to just try it and see what the result is, and then you'll be able to reproduce it.
But for stuff like this weekend's test, where part of the test of the new characters is like all the possible combinations of, you know, heavy armor on my left hand and light armor on my right hand and you know, medium armor on my chest, and making sure all those meshes and armor pieces line up and don't do anything bad with your skeleton and all of that. Like being able to go into the shiny new, very, very handsome crafting UI and just like, this is the thing I want to make. Here's the materials I need to gather and refine and shape to make it. It's far more intuitive than it used to be, and the UI guys did a really impressive job with it.
Omar on the YouTube chat asks, what is your favorite class you guys are working on?
My favorite class used to be the Stone Healer, and then Ben took my teleport away. So...
yeah, that's something we'll have to eventually get hooked back up.
I historically have played tanks and healers, so getting to play around with the healers is always fun for me, though I've done a lot of that recently, so I will probably take a break from healers and focus on the tanks now that they've got a lot more arsenal options at their disposal.
It's hard for me to say. I have sort of gotten to where I play the Black Knight probably the most, because that's sort of the baseline standard character. Like, that was the first one we ever worked on. And as we're reworking some of our ability mechanics and starting to implement new classes, everything kind of gets compared back to that as a sort of standard. But I've ended up liking the way that the Forest Stalker has been going because of the synergies between the different abilities and having sort of a different kind of archer than primarily just shooting arrows that deal damage to things, because they have a lot of interesting utility functions. So we'll see how that ends up going. I think there's going to be a lot of very interesting mechanics coming up in the future when we get into some of our other classes that we haven't even started working on yet. But even of the ones we have so far, and in the very simple list of abilities that we have for them right now, I think they're doing fairly well. So I'd like to get some feedback once we have more opportunities to test.
Unknown RH asks, is CSC still facing any challenges on placing special animations in Ability Builder, such as dash or teleport, etc.? What would it look like if fire is mixed with a special movement-related animation?
Not sure I quite understand.
Yeah, also there's a lot of art questions there. Ben can speak to a little bit of sort of how he envisions things. But it's really up to the artists to actualize all that.
Are there any artists that can come over here?
Probably not. They're too busy. That's why they're not on here.
Yeah. We were originally going to put Tyler on here, but he's really busy with stuff, and I had some time, and Ben had some time, so.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Unknown RH, you have a really good art question, but we don't have any artists on stream today. So ask it again later. Mumblefish asks, will body size be linked to stats like strength in any way?
Not directly. The larger races, like giants, will have higher strength and vitality and things like that, just because that makes logical sense. But there's not a stat correlation where, depending on how tall you are, that determines how much strength that you'll get.
Yeah, we've talked about the giants might get bigger with age.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure exactly where we stand on that right now, but that's definitely a possibility that we've discussed in the past. So their height could sort of be influenced by stats, but right now strength is not one of those.
Enoch87 asks, what's the most difficult near-term milestone you guys are trying to tackle during beta?
one's tough. We're sort of pushing forward on a lot of different fronts all at once right now. So honestly, the choreography has been the big hurdle. We've got lots of different sort of strike teams doing different things within the team, and gluing that all together, I think, honestly, has been the biggest hurdle. Characters, both the characters and the ability stuff we're working on right now are both interesting problems because they're combinatorially complex, such that, like I was talking about with the character stuff this weekend, having a light armor glove and a heavy armor chest and a medium armor helmet might produce unexpected results when all of that was the same except the helmet was missing or heavy armor or something like that. So there's a bunch of combinations there that make testing and validation really tricky. Obviously, for those of you guys who have worked in either testing or software before, we're trying to automate it. We're trying to build things that can do some of the combinatorial potentials for us. But there's a large number of them, and the abilities do the same thing. What weapons am I using? How do the weapons impact the abilities? Which ability components have I combined? Which optional additives have I put onto the ability components? And by the time you multiply all those out, it's very difficult for us to have a comprehensive view of the domain space.
On the gameplay side, I would say siege battles, because that's an area where, like Tim was saying, we have to have characters working well, we have to have abilities working well, we also have to have our buildings and building destruction and stability and all that working well, and we have to have it put together in such a way that it's actually fun. So not just technically functional with all these different elements, but then somehow coming together and assembling all of that into an enjoyable gameplay experience where we can put a bunch of players in the game, have them run around and participate in this in a scenario. It's kind of a contrived situation to get this specific gameplay situation to happen, and have that be really fun. I think that's the biggest thing that I'm looking forward to piecing together and to getting a bunch of people in and getting feedback on, because that's it's ultimately going to be a really big part of the game and just something that we really want to get right at this stage.
Excuse me. ILR in the YouTube chat asks, how big of an impact are healers and CC supposed to have on the meta, and are you worried there won't be a synchronized process to focus on counterplay if they're being implemented after DPS, mages, and meat shields?
Well, healers were in before mages even. Our first three trios were archers, healers, and fighters, and it was kind of for that reason, where healers are such a fundamental part of the game that we couldn't really have a game unless we had healers. CC is sort of a different feature set. It would be very hard to play this game, I think, in a group without having any healing capability. We have like Devout, which is sort of a hybrid healer, and then we have just the pure healer classes. So there's some different options for healing, but at the same time, like, a lot of control effects get spread around to different classes. So even archers have slows, and mages have some too, and have area denial abilities. So it gets spread out more. It's not a specific role. There isn't like a crowd control class in the same way that there is a healing class. So I think healing has that sort of necessity and very well-defined group role, but crowd control really doesn't, as much as it is just sort of a element that gets spread around and has to be accounted for in different ways for different classes.
Well, I think also designing and tuning crowd control appropriately and efficiently and effectively all sort of hinges on having crowds to control. And early in development, we generally have a smaller number of players. Like, yeah, you've got, like, in Dark Age, you had your shield stun, that was your single target stun, but in the concept of, like, how does my smaller group take on a larger force by effective application of crowd control, at this stage in testing, outside of our bot tests, we don't really have, like, we haven't had the number of players available to produce large-scale crowds that you would want to or care about effectively controlling.
Yeah, like colloquially, I always think of crowd control just being, concatenated down to CC as being anything that takes control away from anyone for any reason. So not necessarily mass crowds. It's just control effects on characters in general. But a lot of things are going to have very different implications when we get into very large battles, which is what the game is largely about. And so things that weren't necessarily a problem when we only had 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 people, when we start getting into 500, 1,000, 2,000 people, might start being very, very different. And so the scalars on some of these things are going to be definitely an interesting thing to try to account for.
Mumblefish asks, what sort of time frame / workflow are you hoping for class creation and testing going forward?
Well, time frame and workflow, I think, are very different things. I'm hoping that we get, in terms of workflow, so let's talk about that for a minute. I'm hoping that we get some improvements on the way that our classes are implemented. Right now, a lot of things have gone in a very sort of waterfall development structure, where I've had to go through and do a bunch of design, and we haven't had a lot of tools functional yet, so it's just been all on paper, theory crafting all of these things up, and then handing them off to programmers and being like, can we even do this? Is that reasonable? Is it completely insane? Some of the things are completely insane. Some of them are fine. Don't even ask about some of the stuff that I've given to Rob and Ben. Can we do this? No. But a large part of the things are, and then things get revised or simplified or adjusted, and we add new things when it's like, hey, we can actually do this crazy thing. Come up with a design for it. Like, okay, sure. And so that's how that's largely gone. I would like to get it to a point where it's sort of the reverse of that, where there's a lot of things that the system can do, and we can sort of iteratively design around the functionality present in the system, and sort of take the box of toys that we have and combine them in different ways to make new stuff, as opposed to designing us all the stuff on paper and then handing it off into programming to see if we can make it realistically work. In terms of timing, it's because we've been sort of updating and improving our ability system along with the implementation of mages and sort of re-implementing some of the stuff for the other classes at the same time. The timing has been really long, so it's taken us a long time to say, like, well, we need to revise deflection, and we need to account for death differently, and we need to do all these functionally core things. Once those core things are in a good working state and we have a lot of the basic mechanics all functional and working, I'm hoping that the time goes down considerably to implement our next set of classes. And once we get into a good workflow and a good time period of having them, we should see more classes coming into the game a lot faster. Again, a lot of those have been designed on paper already and are just sort of waiting on implementation. And I think the bottleneck will probably come down to the art side of things in most cases, where we have to make all the animations, we want to make new weapons and armor, and we want to make a lot of new visual effects and sound effects. And so that's going to be where I think a lot of the time gets spent when we start talking about time in getting more of the classes put into the game.
Yeah. You mostly covered it. We've got the next few weeks planned out already. I've been in meetings this week and last week where we're planning out the next few sort of months of work. And so there's a lot of planning in and around where we are, what we're doing in the short term, what we're doing in the long term, and sort of looking towards beta 2. So there's a lot of that happening. And as been said, our hope is that we sort of build, we've been doing sort of implementation of systems and compositing them into ability parts and ability components sort of in tandem. We're looking towards sort of building out that stable of implementation such that it sort of snowballs and Ben can just sort of start compositing things together with more and more rapidity. So I'll be right back. I need to go do one thing real quick.
All right.
Well, you can probably answer this. Jack Mode asks, are there any games you are playing, MMO or otherwise, that are inspiring in the development of CU? Anything you've picked up recently and thought, wow, that would be really cool to have in our game?
I would like to have the art from the world of Anthem in our game. it's probably a lot of that is not realistically going to happen because we have to again account for really large battles and much larger draw distances and all that crazy stuff. But our art is getting considerably better. The lighting is getting better. The assets are getting better in a lot of ways.
Tim just asked me to step in for him for a little bit.
Okay. Hey, we had an art question.
What was the art question?
We did. We'll come back to that.
We will. But in terms of other things mechanically, not especially anything recent. A lot of the inspiration for this game comes from much older games, Dark Age of Camelot, obviously, and a lot of other MMOs. And there hasn't really been another really great MMO that I've played that has come out very recently. So I wouldn't say there's a lot of mechanics and inspiration coming from anything that's been very recent. Certainly, I've been playing
That you've been excited about, that you were like, let's do that?
Well, yeah, let's take that idea and see if we can put a spin on it and put it into our game. There hasn't been a lot of stuff like that. I've been playing a lot of games here and there, but not anything that I would say that directly relates to the things that we're doing. And largely that's because we're doing something that is so different and is also in large part a throwback to games that are considerably older.
Yeah, there's a lot of different things, complicated new things.
All right, we have an art question. Unknown RH asks, last week, the news update had something in art called representing each of the classes as elements in the new Ability Builder UI. Could you elaborate on that more? What does it mean?
Oh, so those you're talking about the kind of like, I don't know what to call them. They were background images for the Ability Builder, and they were a bunch of stylistic sketches from Michelle of the different classes. That's what those were. They were I'm pretty sure what he's talking about is those black and white images, and those are basically like background elements in the Ability Crafter. So the Ability Crafting UI has had a whole lot of rework. Nobody outside of us has seen it yet, but that's what those are from.
Related to Ben's mention earlier, John on the YouTube chat asks, are there limitations inherent to the lots of people all in one place ethos that impact how good the game can look and feel relative to other modern games?
Yep.
I think Tyler's a bit more...
Yeah, I'm in the middle of this right now.
Like, in terms of design, you do have to account for the scale that we're going for, in terms of what the abilities can do, in terms of what the player is capable of doing and how they're able to manipulate their environment around them. But I think there's a lot more art implications than there are design.
Yeah, I mean, obviously from a design perspective, there's a lot of things that change when you're dealing with that many people in combat and stuff, and how do you mitigate big groups of people just trashing one player, all different kinds of stuff we've talked about over the years. Definitely from an art sense, the easiest way to think of this is from an art sense is you've got a bucket. That's as much, and it holds a whole bucket full of polygons or a whole bucket full of sprites or whatever it is. And when you're trying to put that many characters on screen, you have to figure out ways to do it. We're not doing anything easy here. We're trying to make really good looking characters that also can support running around with 1,000 players. If you look at the trees I made, those things went through 3 iterations where I've knocked out like every triangle counted, right? Because if you've got 1,000 trees in the background, that's another 1,000 polys that is being taken away from the characters in the foreground. And we've been doing a lot of talking about this with the Character Art 2.0 because we basically, as of last week, had finished up most of the major issues, had all the assets in there. And then this week we started putting in the LOD work. And the way that works is level of detail. So my guy up in front, we increased in the new versions, we increased their polys by a few thousand. So something that might have been 10,000 is now, say, 12,000. But so what we did is we said, hey, when you get up real close to your character, that's when you're going to see it. It's an absolute waste to have 12,000 polys on the character when you get about 20 meters away. And then obviously less and less and less until you become this high, and you don't need a character that's high, and that's why we have levels of detail for the models. One of the things we do if you play in any of those big tests, what'll happen is you'll see a few characters closest to your camera and yourself are all going to be LOD 0. It's only a few characters. Then we drop them down to 1, that's like 7 of them, and then we drop them down to 2, that's like 12, and we drop them down to 3, and that's more. Right now we're kind of threading the needle between making them look as good as we can so that while they're running around kind of right in your frustrum of what you can see, but also be really performant. The new version of things, I'm totally taking this over into a character lauding thing, but it's been in my head. The new version of things will be the artist created LODs, which are cheaper than the procedurally lauded ones that we had as before. Plus, they look better. We've managed to, when you've got a human brain behind it versus writing an algorithm over and over and over and over, you can just make really good choices as to how the characters look. So I think like our TDD Fiona in his heavy gear, I think it's around LOD 2 is 1,500 triangles, and I think he's around 12,000 in LOD 0. So what we're doing is we have to drop it down drastically as you move, based on distance. But at the same time, if you're in a huge battle, what's going to happen is you're going to have that LOD 2 character running around right next to your guy. There's only so many polys we can put on the screen. So right now we're trying to make it sure that like that still looks like a TDD Fiona running around next to me, but he's not choking my system, and I can still see where everybody is.
Yeah. So you have to worry about the number of polygons.
Yeah.
You have to worry about
lighting.
Textures.
So yeah, I mean the big battles makes it very difficult. It's not just technically difficult; it's artistically difficult. Mm-hmm. It's if I only have 5 guys running around on the screen, I can make those 5 guys look fantastic. If I have several thousand, we have to be careful about everything. I mean, even when you go into the game and you look at the grass cards, like simplest thing, it's two triangles. Sometimes I try and make it 1 triangle, and you'll notice they're spread out a little bit. They're bigger. If you go into a game like say Witcher 3 or something, your grass cards might be in comparison to my body like this big, and there's lots of them all over the place.
They move.
But mine are this wide, because then I only have to spend 2 triangles for something this wide versus 2 triangles for something this wide.
Yeah.
So we constantly have to make very smart decisions.
Unknown RH asks, when do we expect to have crafter classes for each realm, as they are a key class for launch?
Not yet. I don't have a date yet. We'll let you know when we get to them.
Can I put that on the schedule?
We're talking about it, yeah.
Okay.
John on the YouTube chat asks, how do you approach hybrid and dedicated healer design to keep them from stepping on each other's roles, to avoid meta deciding one or the other is irrelevant in competitive gameplay?
Well, to some extent, they do step on each other's roles in the same way that like multiple damage-based classes step on each other's roles, because they're all basically doing DPS. So what's the difference, right? Why wouldn't you just take the one that's the best? And the key to doing that in both of those cases is to ensure that their mechanics are significantly different, and also just to make sure that they have different play styles and appeal to different people. So you might have 2 classes that have wildly different themes, and so some people are going to like one and some people are going to like the other. Assuming they do their job mostly okay, people are going to pick both of them. In your very high-end meta, it might be that because one has a specific utility function, or one has a slightly higher average number or peak number, or when you get into burst versus sustain and things like that, that's more appealing, and so they get picked for that specific reason. And that's when you get into actually doing balance and saying, well, this needs to be increased or decreased to fix some of these balance issues where things are objectively better, or at least in practice better, as it occurs in most cases, in most situations in the actual game. But for the most part, you can do a lot with the differences between classes and ensure that classes that people pick do have different roles. When it comes to healing, the hybrid healers are more built around doing damage and healing kind of at the same time. So you probably wouldn't want to have a hybrid as your only healer in your group. You might want to have multiple of them, or one hybrid healer and one pure healer or something like that. Or you might just want to have pure healers and not have any hybrids, depending on what you're doing and what your functionality is. I hope that they won't step on each other too much to where it's just one or the other, and the opposite isn't appealing at all. But again, they'll have a lot of different mechanics, a lot of different theming to them, and because those roles and that gameplay of I only have to worry about healing, or I have to worry about healing in order to do damage and doing damage in order to do healing, and I have more things going on. I think different people are going to care about that and like that sort of play style. So hopefully both of those will get used, and hopefully people will find interesting cases for both of them. And again, because our game is sort of rock, paper, scissors based, and because there's different strengths and weaknesses for different things, those classes will have different counters, different other enemy classes that are good against them and that they are good against, although for pure healers not quite so much on the offensive side. And so if the meta shifts too far where, say, only pure healers are getting picked for one realm or another, then the counter to that gets picked because that's the typical thing that they tend to need to deal with. Then starting to play the hybrid healer instead of the pure healer might start being very appealing because you're not getting countered as hard in most of the groups that you'll run across. So hopefully that does a little bit of auto balancing for us. But it's definitely a challenge, and it's something that, as you probably know, if you play a lot of these games, all of these games run into. There's balance patches for games that are 10 years old, so there's going to be balance going on basically forever in order to deal with the problems and the difficulties that happen when we have so many classes and so many things going on in the game.
I like hybrid classes.
Mumblefish asks, can we capture enemy NPCs, or better yet players, and enslave them for use in mining, etc.?
Wasn't there a game that did that recently?
Yeah.
It was only
games.
out. I don't know if it was still out.
Yeah, you can.
So
you
you
can
put someone in a
capture-
cage. That's
You
terrible. That's just not fun. I mean, unless you can get out in a reasonable amount of time.
Yeah, that's been the case in a lot of survival games. Atlas is one of those, and that's. I mean, you could say in terms of, I was talking earlier of like other games that I've played, Atlas is probably the closest thing to an MMO that I've played recently, and that is one of their mechanics, and that's not something that I expect us to probably do. But
yeah, I don't think we've ever talked about that.
But there are a lot of things to do with NPCs as far as crafter helpers and guards and things like that. We haven't really talked about the ability to like capture them, but certainly going out and killing them off is going to be something that's going to be fairly important in a lot of cases. So there's going to be more than just fighting the other players. It's actually killing off their NPCs and caravans and things like that are resources that are important to them as well.
Pyrotron asks, how does an ability builder system work in a game with classes? Wouldn't it make more sense in a game where there are no classes?
Well, it might make more sense in a game where there are no classes. Having a lot of potential to cross-combine things.
That would kind of be an everyone has everything type of thing.
Yeah. Like, so if you had just a classless game and everything was just skill-based, it would probably be harder, I think, because you'd have to account for everything being combined with everything else. And so if you had, like, say, the same number of components, right, for your abilities, everything being able to combine with everything else would be
People
harder.
would very quickly be able to figure out how to make some power abilities.
Yeah, well, it's not.
You'd have to, like you said,
It's
you'd
not
have to
necessarily
tune
true.
for everything.
But it would be harder to design for sure. In terms of how it works in our game, I think it's easier for us to do with the limitation of classes, because you only have to worry about the components within a given class, because each class has its own set of components. There are some that cross over a little bit for things like basic sword attack, which everybody gets, things like that. But for the most part, all the spellcasting stuff, like the different runes that a mage gets, are only present on that one class, so you don't have to worry about, well, what happens if the druid stuff is mixed with the flame warden stuff? Well, that never happens. And so the Flame Warden can have a bunch of internal mechanics and things that they care about that nobody else in the game gets to worry about. And so you don't have to worry about it all crossing over or becoming unbalanced if a whole bunch of possibilities all have to exist within the same in the same sphere at the same time. So I think it works out fairly well. It just means that within your given class you have a set of possibilities, and if you go and you play another class, their possibilities are going to be different, and so you'll have a different set of things to combine and make abilities out of. I don't think that's a problem in a class-based game, because it does mean that your class still has a bunch of different possibilities, just like if we gave you a whole bunch of pre-made abilities and let you pick from those. But it's more dynamic than that, especially because of things like infusions and other subtle modifiers where you can be precisely tuning and adding small little adjustments here and there you'll have a lot of flexibility, I think, more so than you would have in a typical pre-made ability game within your class, to have a lot of different things that you can piece together.
Looking forward to the ability builder again.
Yeah, it'll be a good time, I think. Definitely, it'll be a lot better with art.
Yeah. If anybody missed the old ability builder, that was a lot of fun. Just kind of trying to come up with how you wanted to play your character versus how we were told to play our character. So I'm looking forward to having that back. Plus, it's got as we touched on a moment ago, the UI for it now is just fucking gorgeous. And the next step will be just all the, like you said, the art. We got to work on all the weapons and everything to support VFX so Mike's head doesn't blow up, and a lot of fun things.
Yeah.
Last few minutes here, folks. Right? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Last few minutes. I'm going to be looking for a nice question to end with. Saya OUO has a question from earlier. Have you thought about limiting the field of view / camera distance? I'm always a bit put off by MMOs where all the characters look like ants, but on the other hand, you are kind of forced into zooming out as much as possible to get the most information for gameplay reasons. What is your compromise for CU between visuals and gameplay? Camera always feels like a thing that's hard to get right.
It is.
It is. Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of, if we're just going to say if the camera is hard to get right, there's a lot of things to do with the camera and zooming and collision and things like that, and FOV to get the camera actually just feeling good. As far as camera distance, I think we're a little bit too far right now.
Yeah,
but we haven't.
I feel that too. I mean,
Yeah.
we haven't really focused on it in a while.
Yeah, we haven't done a pass on just general look and feel and user experience.
Yeah, I think that's more like, okay, classes are up and everybody's running around killing each other, and let's come back to the camera. Plus, we've also got the visibility system stuff that we got to talk about too. And
yeah, but I think to some extent those are kind of two different things, because one of them is just how does the character play, and the camera is a large part of that, and the other is like, how does vision even work, and why can you see people over there, or why can you not see people?
I've said to Ben, one thing I would like is to bring our camera in a little bit more, because one of the things I noticed in creating art for the game is the farther out your camera goes, the smaller everything looks. So if you actually have like a third person over the shoulder, or even first person, you can make a tree that is the size of a tree in real life, because your camera goes, okay, well, that's the tree, I look up at it. The problem is when you're in a game like ours, I can make this giant freaking tree, and you zoom the camera out, and now your camera's above the tree, and it makes the tree look really tiny.
Yeah.
That's one of my points, is like there's an immersion I think that happens if the camera's in a little bit closer.
Yeah,
and granted, there's a very fun tactical part to the camera being out farther.
Yeah, like I said, I think that the camera is a little bit far right now and could be brought in. The max camera distance from character could be brought in a little bit closer. But I don't think that we're ever going to get to a point where it's over the shoulder, third person.
No. I just think it needs to be in a little closer.
Yeah, I think that's probably
But
accurate.
that's not saying we're going to do that. That's just saying that's Ben's in my opinion at this time.
Yeah. Like I said, we haven't done a user experience pass in a while, and just gameplay look and feel is a thing that we will do some more attention to here in the future. As far as like the draw distances, because this is an RVR game, so like if you talk about a typical MMO, right? If it's just PvE, all you're doing is basically going to a quest hub, getting some quests, and then going out and doing a quest. You don't necessarily need the long draw distances, because the NPCs are going to be there when you get to the quest
They're not
circle,
going anywhere.
right? Yeah, they're just going to behave like that, and like there's no reason to have the ants running off in the distance. In our game, though, if you're running around in this open world area and you're worried about enemies, being able to see really far and tell that people are out there is going to be kind of important, and that'll allow you to...
Yeah, our draw distance is huge.
Yeah, our draw distance is really far, so if you see...
Hence back to character LODs.
Well, yeah. But once you run over the top of a hill and you see there's 100 people out there that are enemies...
You might turn around and go back.
You're gonna be happier that they're farther away from you than that they don't draw until they suddenly pop in.
Yeah, and they all start traveling towards you
when they're really close. Yeah, so that's one of the reasons that the LOD distance is so far. We are going to be curtailing that, like Tyler said, with a pass on vision that's going to occlude things that are not visible to your character. So if there's a bunch of characters, say, on the other side of a wall, and you just pan your camera around to see that they're there, they won't draw because your character is on one side of the wall and can't see them. We'll be able to remove characters that are in the dark. So when it's nighttime, if you're hiding in the forest, enemy players won't just be able to go through and push tab and find you because you're sitting there and you're an enemy and you're within their distance, because you just won't draw, you won't appear on their screen unless you are somehow illuminated or they get close enough to you and you're able to detect them. So that will be
that'll be a big change
iterated on, at some point when we get into further the vision rules for the game, which is sort of dependent on a little bit of the tech that we're building out for NPCs and navigation and just line of sight tech in general. So, but that is definitely a thing that we're going to be looking into, but it's probably not going to equate to very short draw distances at any point, because I think having very far draw distances, at least under normal viewing conditions, is something that has a lot of value in a game that is about large-scale RVR.
Wow, that was a really extensive answer. I think that actually covered a lot of other questions people were asking. I think that's a good place to end. What do you guys think?
Sure. I'm good. I got to go finish the update, do some more art things, put some LODs in.
Test some LODs?
I don't know. Tim co-opted Nuada Prep for the testing that we're doing right now. So,
so that's testing on the new characters without the LODs?
No. This is, well, yes and no. Right now I think it's just IT right now. I'm not 100% certain of that. And they're testing. The idea is to go in and use the new crafting UI. Go ahead and craft some armor. You obviously are going to have armor, but craft some armor with the new crafting UI. Go in with the new characters. What I need people doing is just going in, swapping all the pieces and gear, like I think Tim was talking about earlier, and let us know if you find issues. And with that said, we know there are issues. We're not done, and we've basically, this is a, hey, is there something I haven't spotted yet kind of test. And yeah, so, and we're going to do that this weekend as well. We're going to, the plan so far still is, hey Tim, do you, everybody just said, hey Tim.
If you're talking about the test right now, I think it's IT and Alpha.
Is the test right now IT and Alpha?
Yep.
And have we said that the plan still is to test tomorrow? Everything seems to be going okay?
Well, JB was just calling me over to look at something, so I've got to investigate that. But assuming nothing bursts into flames, the plan is to do ITs and Alpha tomorrow.
Okay. I think he might...
This weekend, we'll see. It might be tomorrow, might be Sunday.
Oh, we don't know yet?
Yeah.
Okay. So there'll be a further email with more information later today. Either the update will say there is not a test, or it'll say there is a test, and if there is a test, then there'll be a follow-up email.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right, look out for your emails. See you later.
See you later.